Hello and welcome to episode 1 of Let's Talk Football. And for the first episode, I've decided to do a preview of the upcoming Premier League season. Just going through various talking points and giving some predictions on where I think teams will finish, who will be the contenders and that sort of thing. So we'll start with the top 4, and I think the actual top 4 itself, there's going to be a lot of variation inside it. But the top 4 teams, I think, are quite clear for this season. That being Manchester City, Arsenal, Manchester United, and Liverpool. Not necessarily in that order. I just think they're clearly the 4 best teams in the league this season. And we can talk through them all separately now. So we'll start with the defending champions, Manchester City. Obviously, City have a big target on their back after achieving the treble last season. A feat that I personally didn't think I would see achieved in my lifetime, but here we are. And they achieved it playing some of the best football that we've seen over the last 20 years. Some of the best football, certainly in the Premier League. I know obviously there's the great Barcelona team, and there are some great Real Madrid teams in that time. But certainly in the Premier League, the way Manchester City played football last season was ridiculously good. Really underrated is how solid they were defensively, and then going forward, obviously they have Erling Haaland and quite a little gem in Julian Alvarez as well. So they've got goals in that, and they've got defensive stability, which is a good mix when you're targeting trophies and want to be consistent in a Premier League season. They have let a lot of talent leave this summer. What the main one, of course, being Ilkay Gundogan and Riyad Mahrez. And it will be interesting to see how City react in the transfer window. We obviously still have 3 weeks left till the end of the transfer window. And whether they have some players internally that are going to play a more prominent role this season. You look at Cole Palmer. He came off the bench in the Community Shield, scored a good goal. And it could be a season where he takes a step into being a first team regular for Manchester City and replaces Riyad Mahrez on that right hand side. Although I would expect them to go out and buy someone who will at least challenge Palmer, if not be ahead of Palmer, whilst Palmer continues to develop, much in the same way as they've tried to develop Phil Foden over the years with having people in front of him. Although we're going to speak a little bit more about Foden on another podcast. They've been linked heavily with Lucas Paqueta from West Ham United. Rumours of a bid of £70 million circulated yesterday, and I do find it a little bit strange. I watch a decent amount of Premier League football, and Paqueta hasn't. He's looked good on the odd occasion, and I know he works really hard. He can dribble with the ball. He brings that little bit of flair. But what I saw in the Community Shield from Manchester City, and what I do notice sometimes from Manchester City, is they're very fast with the ball, which is great. But against good defensive teams or teams that have schemed well to defend against them, not having someone with express pace, and they don't get express pace from the fullbacks either, because the fullbacks tuck inside and play this narrow new formation that Guardiola has come up with. Because they don't have that much express pace, I saw a lot of it in the Community Shield against Arsenal. There's a lack of penetration at times, and I feel like Paqueta is just another one of these really skillful, good footballers, good passing, good at moving the ball, good at using the ball, but he doesn't have that blister. So if a team actually defends well against City, they can keep them locked and boxed out. So I see them linked with Jeremy Doku and with Michael Olise, who are both faster players. I haven't seen a lot of Jeremy Doku, but Michael Olise's got some pace about him. He's quite tricky as well. He's a good player, very good player, very reasonable price as well at £35 million. But he's out till October, and I do wonder whether City are going to try and change the way they play a little bit. I saw in the Community Shield the lack of width from the fullbacks means that the two wingers should really stay as wide as possible when you've got two forwards in Alvarez and obviously Erling Haaland as well. I do wonder whether City will adapt and change the way they play and try and find a couple more wide players to just try and give them a little bit more pace and a little bit more dynamism. And I can see that potentially being a problem in Europe for them as well. One great purchase that they've got is Gvardiol. I think Gvardiol in that back line, that was already the second best back line in Europe last season. He gives them 10 years, he gives them solidity, he gives them height, he can play left back, he can pass the ball. Yeah, he's a really good signing for them, and he'll keep them ticking over for the next 10 years, I imagine, partnering the other great defenders that they already have. But yeah, I expect City to be strongly in the top four this season. Probably the favourites for the Premier League title, although as I stated before, I do think they're going to have a few issues that they're going to have to work out this season. But yeah, City definitely in the top four. Next, I'm going to talk about my club, which is Liverpool. Now, Liverpool definitely have a lot more questions going into this season than Manchester City do. After what was, let's have it right, it was a poor season last season, all things considered. We went into the season with hopes of winning the Premier League title, competing for European honours, and really trying to build on the success we've had under Jurgen Klopp. And the lack of dynamism from the midfield really hurt us last season. Jordan Henderson, great servant to Liverpool. Fabinho, great servant to Liverpool. But to go from a season where you play 63 games, have a shortened summer, and then go straight into another season, I think Liverpool left themselves really short last season in the centre of the midfield. And the centre of midfield, if you look at the summer business as well, has become... It is just the talking point at Liverpool. You look at Henderson out the door, Milner out the door, Keita out the door, Ox out the door, Fabinho out the door. Although I will say about that, Ox and Keita were not factors in the Liverpool first team. So losing those two players, although it looks like, oh look, we have senior players leaving the club, we're losing two players who would not have featured at all this season. Especially when you consider Curtis Jones had his best spell as a Liverpool player towards the end of last season and really put his name in the mix for a starting berth. Definitely a starting berth against Chelsea coming up if a defensive midfielder hasn't been purchased before that point. But certainly this season, I think Curtis Jones is going to have more of an impact and going to play more games. And it's a big season for Curtis Jones, because if he has a strong season for Liverpool, I do think there are spaces in the England squad for someone with Jones's abilities. Obviously Harvey Elliott's going to play this season. Stefan Bajcetic emerged last season and looked really composed and confident for an 18-year-old lad. And I think he's going to play a lot of games this season. Liverpool obviously have signed Dominic Szoboszlai and Alexis McAllister this summer. Both midfielders who give Liverpool something different than what they've had under Klopp's tenure at Liverpool. They both give us a goal threat, which hasn't really been a thing from the Liverpool midfield over the last 4 or 5 years. We had very functional midfielders, whereas now we have more ball-playing midfielders, which is nice, but we definitely need a couple of functional midfielders to come in. Maybe I've seen a bid as potentially went in for Moses Caicedo today. I think that would be a brilliant signing for Liverpool. And I think if Liverpool were to get Caicedo, I know this is going to be biased and I'm not going to hide my biases. I think if Liverpool were to get Caicedo, our first 11 is as good as any first 11 in the Premier League. I think we have the striking options to definitely... I do think Liverpool have the best attacking options in the Premier League. If you look through the teams that are going to be in the top four, I'm saying Liverpool, City, United and Arsenal. I think in terms of depth of attacking options, I'd stack Gakpo, Salah, Núñez, Diaz and Jota up with any of them. I think Liverpool have 4 players there who are capable of scoring 15 goals at least in a Premier League season, which goals win football matches at the end of the day. And if Liverpool can be decent defensively, I do think defence is Liverpool's biggest issue going into the season. It remains to be seen whether Virgil van Dijk is the Virgil of old or whether the decline is going to be really setting in. I think people went over the top with criticism of him last season because I think the midfield really didn't protect the Liverpool back four. And if you look at the raw numbers, Van Dijk actually had a decent season. He just wasn't this generational, unbelievable defender as we've become accustomed to over the last couple of years. He really, it just at times he got isolated and he looked like he had issues. The other centre back is an issue for me at Liverpool because I love Ibrahim Konate. I think he's one of the best young centre backs in the world, but he has been rather, I'm not going to say injury prone, but he's picked up injuries whilst he's been at the club. And then you're looking at Joe Matip, who's been a fantastic servant, but I think his decline last season was steeper than Van Dijk's. But obviously he doesn't have the same aura and the same standing as Van Dijk in the world of football, so he didn't get as much criticism. And Joe Gomez. There was a point where I thought Joe Gomez was going to be the man to take up the mantle after Virgil, but he makes far too many silly mistakes. And I think if Liverpool were to lose Van Dijk for a spell, or were to lose Konate for a spell, it could be a problem. I know we've got, I'd say, and I don't think many people would argue that Liverpool have the best goalkeeper in the Premier League, who really saved us last season. But I think when you look at the Liverpool team, there are far more questions in the Liverpool team than there are in the Manchester City team, for example. So, whilst I think Liverpool's ceiling is winning the Premier League, I think more will have to go right for Liverpool to win than for Manchester City to win. Now we move on to an interesting one for me in terms of being in the top four and potentially being in a title race. It's Manchester United. Now, Manchester United have made some big moves this summer, as they do every summer really, bringing in Mason Mount, Rasmus Højlund, who's the goalkeeper, Onana, and I'm not sure if they brought anybody else in, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I feel like, particularly Onana, he has the capability to be the most transformative player that I've seen brought into the Premier League this season. His ability to pass the ball out from the back, whilst I think is a little bit overstated, I seem to recall as soon as they signed him there was like a 4 or 5 minute compilation video of him making mistakes passing out from the back, which is, it's going to happen if you've got a ball playing goalkeeper, a goalkeeper who likes to spray the ball around and likes to take risks. There are going to be occasions where he takes a risk that leads to the opposition scoring. I remember the Liverpool game against Leicester City, about 2 months into Alisson being at Liverpool, and he tried to do a Cruyff turn inside the Liverpool box, lost the ball, Leicester City scored. I'm not sure if we got beat that day, I think we might have done. And it's just going to be interesting. It's going to be jittery early doors with his passing out from the back. He does have decent options to pass the ball to. Obviously, Casemiro is brilliant at protecting the ball and moving the ball up the pitch. Luke Shaw's fine on the ball. Martinez is fine on the ball. Obviously, Fernandes and Mason Mount. I do see Mason Mount collecting the ball from Onana quite a lot this season, just because he's a little bit more mobile and he can push up the pitch with dribbling, rather than necessarily giving it to Casemiro and slowing it down and passing the ball. But I look at the right hand side of the United's defence. Varane is obviously good on the ball, but I don't think he's as good on the ball as he used to be at Real Madrid. I think injuries have taken just a little bit of that, not composure, but it takes him longer to get the ball settled now. And I wonder whether Manchester United will spend a lot of the time going left, basically, this season from the goalie, or central, rather than going right, because then the right back option is Aaron Wan-Bissaka, who definitely improved on the ball at times last season, and according to United fans that I've seen on YouTube, has looked decent on the ball this season in pre-season. But I can't get out of my head games that I've seen Liverpool play, United especially, where we've just been happy to have Wan-Bissaka have the ball because we know that we're going to take it back off him or he's going to make a mistake. And I wonder whether United will try and, they'll keep Wan-Bissaka in the team, but I wonder whether they'll try and keep him away from the ball, from passing out from the back, because obviously that's his weakest point. United are going to be fantastic defensively. They were fantastic defensively last season. They were very, very solid. Conceded the least goals in the Premier League. I think the fact that David De Gea, not the least goals, sorry, they kept the most clean sheets in the Premier League. I think the fact that David De Gea was so behind last season and yet still got the Golden Glove. Tells you how well United defended last season. They didn't particularly score a lot of goals though. And I look at the United team and I think back to that point I made about Liverpool before, about us having 5 players who could potentially, well, 4 players who I think could potentially get 15. If I was to say 10 Premier League goals, that number would maybe move up to 5, if not 6. Whereas for Manchester United, they've got Marcus Rashford, who is a very streaky goal scorer. So I can see him getting 15 to 20 Premier League goals. But what I feel like Rashford does is he gets his goals in patches. Romelu Lukaku was very good at doing this while he was in the Premier League. You go on a 10-game run where he scores 8 goals, and then maybe go on a 5-6 game run where he doesn't score at all. Now obviously Rashford is a winger and Lukaku is a centre forward, so it'll matter less if it's Rashford. But if he's their primary goal scorer, he will need to be more consistent in front of goal this season. Bruno Fernandes will obviously get great numbers, and the captaincy for me with Bruno, he's going to be a lot more of a captain by performances on the pitch rather than a captain with his words, I think. Because, you know, he does have a tendency to be a little bit petulant on the pitch. But that's fine, lots of players do. A lot of United players this season, particularly going forward, have really big seasons. They really need to show that they've got the ability to win games, score goals, create chances, and just kick on from what happened last season to what's going to happen in the coming season. The biggest one for me is Jadon Sancho. I think when United bought Sancho, they didn't really have an idea of what player they were buying. I think they thought that they were getting a Leroy Sané and actually got a Jack Grealish. Sancho, he's very good on the ball, and if you look at the goals he scored for Dortmund, a lot of them were as Dortmund were breaking up the pitch and spaces were opening with passing options opening up for him. He didn't really burn people for pace and skim people too much. He's very much a ball control winger. I think he's solid enough in terms of pace, but I don't think he's actually got that first step that's going to blitz past someone. And I've seen people talking about him potentially being used in a false 9 role this season. And I think if he's used in a false 9 role, that could be very interesting. They will be relying again though on Rashford and on the other wingers and potentially Bruno to pick up the goal scoring output, particularly Anthony on the other side. Now, he's a tricky player, he's got a little bit of pace, but I think he flattered to deceive last season. And I think in order to justify that big price tag that they paid for him, I think he needs to really kick on this season, because if United are going to be a threat in the Premier League and going to be a threat in Europe, they need to get goals from their front line. Manchester City are going to get goals from their front line. Liverpool certainly are going to probably overly rely on goals from our front line. So I think United are going to need to get goals from their front line. Højlund, I'm surprised they've went for Højlund, if I'm honest. I think if Harry Kane's there and he's available and Tottenham have accepted the bid, I'm very surprised that United have not at least matched that bid and gave him something to think about. I think if you drop Harry Kane up front for United, they instantly go from top 4 to definitely going to challenge for the title. I think they could challenge for the league title. I think they could be in the league title fight coming into like February, March. And then as games start to pile up with the European competitions and stuff, I think that could be where United sort of drift away a little bit. I do think that Garnacho for United is going to have an incredible season though, and he's a contender for being the breakout star in the Premier League. Next we have Arsenal. Now Arsenal, they were the surprise package of last season. I don't think anyone expected Arsenal to finish second in the league. I think Arsenal caught everyone off guard, particularly early doors, playing a really nice, expansive brand of football. I actually see the way Arsenal play as sort of a marriage between the way Manchester City play, with ball dominance, and the way Liverpool have played, with fullbacks bombing on. Although the fullbacks in the Community Shield tucked in a little bit. I was particularly impressed with Jurrien Timber. I thought he was fantastic in the Community Shield. But Arsenal, the word that keeps swimming around my head for Arsenal when I think about this season is pressure. if you look, we can't ignore the fact that in the last 10 games of last season in the Premier League, Arsenal completely crumbled under the pressure of needing to win the league, of needing to win those games to win the Premier League. It really frustrates me because I think last season, if Liverpool were playing at their best, City left enough of a gap for another team to win the Premier League last season, which they haven't really done over the last couple of years. And Arsenal were in a position to exploit that gap. And as soon as the going got tough, they disappeared. Saka, great player, great first half of last season, really productive. The sort of winger as well who he really attacks his fullback, which I like. He isolates his fullback and makes it. If you're defending against Bukayo Saka, you do typically have to work hard for the whole game. But his production towards the end of last season fell off a cliff. He is a young player. That might be a learning curve for him, but it's definitely something that we've got to consider. Martinelli on the other side, again, great first half of last season, great goal scorer, really direct, really good player. I've seen him compared to Sadio Mane. I don't want people to go that far yet, but I do think Martinelli's a really good player, and between them two, you should have a decent amount of goals. I think when you look at Arsenal's capacity to score goals and compare it to Liverpool, City and United's, Arsenal will need to have, each of the Arsenal forwards will need to have their best season this season in order for Arsenal to win the league. Gabriel Jesus will have to, one, stay fit, and two, prove that he can lead the line in a team that's going to win the Premier League. Martinelli, I think, to be honest, actually, if Martinelli and Saka repeat their output from last season, would do it in the big moments, and they get a lot of goals out of Gabby Jesus, they get goals out of Eddie Nketiah because it looks like he's staying, and they manage to do the unthinkable and actually get something out of Kai Havertz this season. I actually think Arsenal could be a threat going forward. The Havertz signing, I thought in the Community Shield he did okay, but I feel like for 65 million, if you spend 65 million pounds on a player, that player should be a guaranteed you're going to play 70% of the games as a starter in the league and in the cup competitions in the Champions League. And I just don't think Havertz is. I think he's the sort of, basically I think Havertz is a good footballer, but he's never actually been put in a position, so he doesn't know how to play any position to an elite level. And because of that, you see him make lots of little mistakes. His finishing's not great, so if you play him up front, he's not going to bang the goals in. If you play him as a false nine, he was alright as a false nine, but are you really spending that sort of money to have him play as a false nine? He definitely can't play as a midfield three. I think the Arsenal midfield three of Rice, Partey and Odegaard, I think that's a lock for most of the season, really. And I actually think that's a really strong midfield three. Especially Rice. I think Rice has the capability to really be a transformative signing for that Arsenal midfield. He's definitely an upgrade on Granit Xhaka. And Martin Odegaard, when the walls came tumbling down last season in regards to the title race, he was the one who kept going and the one who tried to take it to the very end. And I think that shows good character and fantastic ability. And the fact that they got him for 35 million quid in this market is really impressive. That's my top four. The positions of the clubs, I might do an actual 1 to 20 at some point. I'm not too sure about that. But I think all of those clubs have the capability to win the Premier League this season. If I was to pick a favourite, I would say it's Manchester City. But then, outside of that, I think, as I said, Arsenal, it'll be how Arsenal deal with the pressure, about how Arsenal deal with multiple games a week. Liverpool, how quickly they can introduce those two new midfielders or potentially three new midfielders and get some more defensive solidity. And Manchester United, it's just purely about, can you score 25 extra goals in the Premier League this season to take you up to being a title challenger? And then City's just about whether they've got the passion and the desire and the hunger to keep going at that elite level and keep trying to win and do something unprecedented, which is get to 4 in a row. So that's my top four. Moving down the table, we're going to talk about the bottom three now. Now, the bottom three is the Premier League's very interesting this season. I think the top half is very good. I could have mentioned Aston Villa as outside contenders for the top four. Obviously, there's a big cloud over Chelsea. Yeah, I don't know whether Chelsea will be fantastic or Chelsea could be. I mean, Chelsea can improve on last season and finish 10th. So, I don't know how Chelsea are going to be this season. I see them having again an issue with goal scorers. I think the league is really lacking in guaranteed 15 to 20 goal a season goal scorers this season, and I feel like the teams that I think can compete for the top four or the top eight, they do have goal scorers in their teams. Newcastle I didn't mention for the top four. I'd expect Isaac to kick on this season. Obviously Callum Wilson's been fantastic for them in the Premier League. I'm not too sure about Sandro Tonali, and we'll get onto that a little bit later. But I'm not too sure about him. I think Newcastle are very good defensively. They obviously have the pressure of playing in the Champions League this season. A bit of a rogue shout this, but I don't see Eddie Howe being the Newcastle manager at the end of the season. Not necessarily because he's doing a bad job. I likened it the other day to a friend of mine about when Liverpool got rid of Rodgers because we got the okay that we could get Klopp. And I feel like this season there will be a point where there'll be a manager there who's going to take Newcastle to that next level, and Newcastle will strike and go for him rather than hang on to Eddie Howe for sentimental reasons and then potentially miss out on an opportunity to get a manager that's going to jump them up, a manager that's going to have a little bit more pull. Who else is there? Brighton. Expect Brighton to be a little bit worse this season because they got to deal with Europa League football. They're going to be losing at least McAllister, potentially Casado as well. The signings that they've brought in, they've been decent. Don't get me wrong, I expect Brighton to just reveal 3 or 4 players this season again who no one's ever heard of, no one's ever seen play. They come in and they tear the league apart like they did last season. Matoma was the one for me last season. Never heard of the kid. Comes and plays a few games, plays against Liverpool in the Cup and absolutely annihilates us. And I imagine Brighton have a few more of them in the locker, but I think juggling all the games this season will be tricky. And if Brighton finish in the top 10 after the season that they've just had and getting into Europe, I think that'll be more than fine for them. But away from the top half of the table, I think the bottom half of the table is terrible. I really do. I imagine there's going to be quite a gap between the points that the teams in the top half get and the points that the teams in the bottom half get. Like, going back to Liverpool, United, City and Arsenal, I imagine all of those clubs will be north of 80 points this season. Potentially a couple north of 90 points this season. Whereas I imagine to stay up in the league, it's going to take 29, 30, 31 points. I really don't think it's going to be a lot. I look at Sheffield United, who are my prediction to finish 20th. I think they'll finish dead last. They've lost the 2 best players from last season. And there doesn't seem to be a positive feeling around that club if you look online. Another club that's definitely in that category is Wolves. Wolves have lost. Although losing Jimenez on the surface looks bad, he didn't have a great season last season. But he was a target man, someone who could bring people into play. And Wolves, while they've been in the Premier League, haven't really been a goal-scoring team. They've relied on being good defensively, good on the counter-attack, and using this talent, this influx of talent they've been able to get from Portugal. But now it seems like it's all gone beat-tongue. Obviously, Lopetegui's walked. They have Gary O'Neill's came in, and I can just imagine each season as a team that you might not have expected goes down. I feel like Wolves are that team. I've asked around in a couple of group chats that I'm in, and every single person has Wolves to go down. So I imagine everyone's looking and seeing the same picture being painted of the club seems like it's a disaster this season. I think Wolves are going to go down. Moving on to Luton. I'm not going to pretend that I know the first thing about this Luton side. I know that they came up last season through the playoffs. I actually watched the playoff final. Very bitty game, them and Coventry. I think the quality in the Luton team, the story of Luton is fantastic. Coming up from non-league football to the Premier League in 9 seasons is absolutely incredible. And I think with Luton, they're probably a little bit ahead of schedule in terms of getting to the Premier League. And if they just come up, enjoy themselves, they've got for the fans particularly, they've got a couple of great away days. They'll beat a couple of the top teams at home as well. It always happens. I hope it's not Liverpool, but I can see it happening. They'll beat a couple of the top teams at home, and they'll just set themselves up as a club to go down into the Championship, getting a new stadium, and they'll set themselves to be a consistent Championship club with the capability of getting into the Premier League, which for Luton Town, from the position they were in, is absolutely incredible. A couple of the other clubs that are going to be swimming around there, this might be a little bit of a rogue shout, but I think Brentford are in for a rough season, especially until Ivan Toney comes back. When Ivan Toney comes back, I imagine results will pick up. He was a deadly goal scorer last season. I'm surprised that actually he's still at Brentford. I thought he would have moved by now, but obviously with the gambling stuff, he hasn't really had the opportunity to get that big move. I think maybe he'll get that big move next summer once this gambling situation is behind him. Crystal Palace got a good manager. When I say a good manager, they've got a manager that knows that situation. But losing Zaha, who's been their talisman for the last 5-6 years, probably longer, potentially losing Elise, that's a lot of talent leaving Crystal Palace. I know they're going to keep hold of Decore, which is a good thing for them. I imagine he'll be the big ticket that moves on next summer. I know they've still got Joachim Anderson, who's a very good defender, and they've still got a little bit of talent in and around the squad, but I think Crystal Palace are going to struggle this season. The boys across the park, Everton. It's an interesting one with Everton because last season they were... I'm amazed that they were as bad as they were last season and didn't get relegated. And often you can go either way when that situation happens. You either circle the drain until you go, or actually you get your shit together basically and you're able to move into the next seasons and kick on. I know they've got the stadium on the docks that's nearly ready. I think it'll be ready halfway through the season following this one. And I feel like they've had a big loss at the back with Yerry Mina and with Connor Cody. I know opening up on the first game of the season, I know a lot of Blues, if they see Michael Keane in the back line, they're going to be... the heart palpitations will start. I don't think any Everton fan is particularly looking forward to the start of the new season. But I feel like they've got a manager that's perfect for Everton Football Club in Sean Dyche. He's pragmatic. He knows how to set a team up. He's actually a little bit more... He's got a little bit more in his locker than people give him credit for on the pitch. I feel like his teams, they hunt the ball down quite well. And the way he was using Decore towards the end of last season is that like number 10 second striker sort of position. I mean, it was really paying dividends towards the end of last season. And I think if they can manage Dominic Calvert-Lewin's fitness and bring Dwight McNeil into play and bring Dan Juma into play, who they've brought in, who is an outside shout for signing of the season, if he's as effective as he could be. I think Everton, I don't think it'll be a great season for Everton, but I think Everton will... There's definitely 3 worst teams in the Premier League, and I think they've got decent little bit of talent in the centre of midfield. Ashley Young will bring that experience, and they've got a really, really good goalkeeper. And it's surprising, really, because a couple of seasons ago I'd have been the first person to say Jordan Pickford's shite, he's erratic, he makes mistakes, he's only got little arms. But the last 2 or 3 years, Jordan Pickford's not done a thing wrong. I think he's been spotless. I think he's comfortably England's number 1. And actually, when I see people bigging up certain goalkeepers, and I think Pickford doesn't seem to get a shout in these conversations anymore, and he definitely deserves it. So yeah, I think Everton will be fine. West Ham, West Ham. So if West Ham get 105, well, they've got 105 million for Declan Rice, and if they get 70 billion odd for Lucas Paqueta, I think that's the sort of business that West Ham can't turn down. Personally, Paqueta, I've seen a lot of West Ham fans online talking about like, oh, we've let Rice go, we've let Lanzini go, we've let Scamacca go. Scamacca didn't hardly kick a ball for them last season, so I don't know why they're too asked about that. And Paqueta, good footballer, 75 million. If they can turn that 75 million into 2 or 3 players, I think when you're down there, when you're a team that's down the league, losing one player and bringing 3 players in is typically a good thing. Particularly if they get Harry Maguire. I think Harry Maguire has went full circle and has almost become underrated. I know it's fun to make fun of Maguire and you see the videos and the mistakes are the bad. But when he's played for Leicester, there's a reason Harry Maguire was considered to be one of the leading centre-halves in the league, particularly one of the leading centre-halves of the country. He's a threat aerially from set pieces. He wins defensive headers and attacking headers. And you can imagine Ward-Prowse is a goal threat from set pieces, but putting the ball into the box for Harry Maguire, I feel like when you look at David Moyes, he plays the averages quite well. And the chances of West Ham with Souček, Maguire, Dawson getting the crosses into the box and winning headers to score goals, that's more likely than West Ham carving teams open from open play. So I think West Ham will probably be fine. They'll have to obviously juggle Europe as well, but I imagine they'll be fine in that sense. So yeah, the teams I think will go down are Sheffield United, Wolves, and Luton. Moving on to the Premier League Golden Boot winner this season. Now with Harry Kane going, I feel like the main threat to what will be Erling Haaland's Golden Boot this season has left the league. I would say Mohamed Salah would be a threat, but Salah's, if you look at Liverpool's last 10 games, going into the end of last season and pre-season this season, Salah's doing a lot more creative work. He's assisting a lot more than he's scoring. And I imagine Salah will be more of a creator this season than a goal scorer. I know that might be a hot take, but I imagine Salah's goal numbers will still be high, late teens, but I imagine his assist numbers will be quite high, probably late teens as well, like his 15 to 16, 17, something like that. So I think that's going to... Liverpool's goals, I imagine, are going to be a lot more spread out, whereas I think City's goals will be funneled through Erling Haaland. The only real contenders... I don't see any contenders really for that Golden Boot award, so I think that's going to go to Erling Haaland. Player of the season will be interesting. I've got a couple of names that you'd expect, and then I've maybe got a name that people will think, oh, that's Liverpool bias, but hey ho. In fact, I'll get that one out the way. I think Trent Alexander-Arnold's going to have an exceptional season this season. I think moving him away from right back in certain situations and having him being in the midfield is going to allow him to be more creative. It's going to make sure he's not isolated 1v1 too much as well. I think Trent's defending, it gets overblown. People are very sensationalist, so he's the worst defender in the world. He's not a bad defender. He gets a lot of interceptions. He anticipates well. He's good at helping others in defence as well, like doubling up on people. What's happened a lot with Trent is the way Liverpool play, he's found himself Trent against Vinicius Jr. or against Mitoma or against tricky fast wingers who have been able to move him around a little bit, because Trent he can move but he's not quick, so at times he's had issues particularly defending 1v1, but I feel like this season his creative numbers are going to be up, he's going to be assisting a lot, and I just think he has the ability to really kick on this season and show that he's not just one of the best fullbacks in the league, he's just one of the best players in the league all round. Obviously Erling Haaland's going to be up there as a contender. If he scores 30 odd goals in the Premier League, you can't take that away from him as a contender for player of the season. Is there any others I can think of? Bruno Fernandes, I imagine, will be up there. I think he will be relied on to score a lot of goals and create a lot of goals for United this season, as he's done for the last couple of seasons, but I think he'll be up there as well. Who else? Chelsea, I can't imagine Chelsea have any contenders for player of the season. It's definitely going to be a finding your feet season for Chelsea. So I don't see them having any players who are standouts in that respect. Arsenal, Declan Rice, I imagine, will be a contender. William Saliba, who was fantastic last season. For a centre half to be the player of the season, you have to be an extra level above, though. So I think any defensive-minded players, I wouldn't really lean towards them being the player of the season. Martin Odegaard could certainly do it. But yeah, I'd say the main... I'd probably go with a Haaland, but my rogue shout is for Trent Alexander-Arnold. Moving on to a category that I thought that it'd be good for me to have in this video is breakout star of the season. Now, there's a few different ways you can look at breakout star. You can look at someone going from being virtually unknown to being an established player, or you can look at someone who's known going from being decent or on the periphery of a first team to being that team's best player or a leading figure in that team and getting international appearances and stuff. And it's the latter that I'm going with. I think the breakout star this season is going to be Jacob Ramsey at Aston Villa. I know he played a lot of games last season, but I look at that Villa midfield, and with Tielemans, McGinn and Luiz, I imagine McGinn will start to be getting phased out this season. Not phased out, but I don't think he'll necessarily be a first name on the team sheet caliber player this season. I feel like Tielemans and Luiz will rotate quite a lot. So I feel like Jacob Ramsey's going to play a lot of football this year, particularly in the Conference League. By the way, I think Aston Villa will win the Conference League fairly easily. But particularly in the Conference League and the Premier League, I feel like Jacob Ramsey, with that pace coming up from midfield, he's got an eye for a pass, he's very good at getting into the box. I feel like Jacob Ramsey, if you look at the England squad, Jordan Henderson's not going to be in the England squad for the next tournament, which I believe is the Euros next season. And England need to find a replacement in the squad for Jordan Henderson. And there's 2 or 3 players in the Prem who... And actually, I think there was one in the Championship if he manages to get out of there in Dewsbury Hall. But there's 2 or 3 players who will be vying for that Henderson spot. And I think one of them, and the one who will get it, will be Jacob Ramsey. So he's my breakout star of the season. If we want someone who's a little bit younger and who hasn't necessarily made an impact on first team football yet, Cole Palmer is an obvious selection in that regard. Ben Doak at Liverpool, potentially even Garnacho at United. He could be a breakout star of the season as well. So that is the end of episode 1 of Let's Talk Football. Please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed it, and leave your comments below. Thank you.